Hello and welcome to the Business Today show. I'm Udayan Mukherjee. All of you would have heard of the Big Four. They are the lofty four professional service firms, which are Deloitte, PwC, Ernst & Young, and KPMG, who between them carve up most of the consulting and accounting business in the world. But over the recent past, it's Deloitte which has crept over to the number one position and firmly to the number one positions above its three rivals. And that's no mean doing, given that competition is pretty intense among the Big Four. And the man who's the architect of Deloitte's success and the man behind the journey of Deloitte's journey to the top of the Big Four is a man who hails from the village of Rohtak in India. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome Punit Renjen, the global CEO of Deloitte, to the Business Today show. Punit, it's wonderful to have you with us today, and thank you very much for joining in.
Thank you, Dan. It's wonderful to be with you.
Well, as I said in my introduction, you're the man who's taken Deloitte to the top. But at the end of this year, you will be stepping away from your role as global CEO and become the CEO emeritus of Deloitte. Have you, in your tenure, do you feel confident that you have armed Deloitte with the arsenal enough to keep Deloitte at the top? Because it's one thing getting there, but it's another thing staying there against the competition of very formidable players, your competitors like Ernst & Young and PwC and KPMG. Do you feel confident as you step away that you have left Deloitte in that kind of position?
First, thank you for that kind introduction. Rohtak is now, I believe, a nice town, not a village, but it's wonderful to be from Rohtak. I finished my second and final term December 31st. And you're right, I will be stepping away from my role. We're term limited out and become the CEO emeritus. It has been quite a journey. In a partnership, it takes the entire partnership and the 400,000 professionals to get you anywhere. And so the credit really belongs to the partnership and to our professionals. It is wonderful to be the number one professional services firm in the world. And as you rightly said, it takes tremendous effort to get to that point, and it takes additional effort to stay at that point. I believe that Deloitte is positioned extremely well. The strategy that we have implemented and executed is still valid, and we need to keep executing on that. But we cannot take our eye off the ball. This is a highly competitive space, and we have to continue to execute. And that is the only way that we will be able to serve our clients with distinction, take care of our people, and maintain, hopefully, our number one position. But there are no guarantees.
Of course, there aren't. But there will be many challenges along the way, and that's not just competition, Punit, because one of the things that you will have to steer Deloitte through over the next couple of years is this whole move globally of separating these professional services companies, because the UK Commission, among one, seems to believe that there are competition issues because of your dominance of the Big Four in this industry, and therefore they're moving to separate the consulting and the accounting arms. Is Deloitte prepared for such an important and such a transitional kind of move?
Regulators in the UK, you mentioned the UK, are talking about operational separation, making sure that we serve our clients, particularly our audit clients, with clear independence, objectivity, and that's exactly what we've been doing. And our audit quality results, as I cited, are testament to that. We made a decision back in June that we are not going to separate our business, that MDM is core to our strategy, the multidisciplinary model. The private partnership culture is core to Deloitte and has been a key ingredient to our success. So we are going to persist with this and persist with high audit quality, which is central to who we are and will remain central to who we are, and persist delivering for our clients, and hopefully as a result, be anointed the number one firm.
Now, I want to talk. I mean, there are so many issues to talk about with you, Puneet, but the one issue I want to start with is one initiative that you started during your tenure, and it's a remarkable one, which is called World Class, which is where you try to bring up 10 million underprivileged people to the kind of level of competence that are probably seen as the domain of the more privileged lot. And this sits very squarely with what the central issue in the corporate world today seems to be, or the economic world seems to be. But on this very show, Ray Dalio, who you probably will know, was telling us last week that the wealth gap is one issue which bothers him more than most other economic issues today. Now, do you, in your conversations with large corporations, do things like this come up frequently? Do they recognize the importance of it, particularly in things like pay gaps, etc., and so that remedial measures can be made underway?
Now, the comment that you made around whether there's a change in the corporate world, I believe there is. When I came to the United States 40 years ago, the prevailing wisdom was the business of business is business. Focus on the business fundamentals and leave everything else to the greater society, to the community. That has changed. I believe increasingly business leaders believe that they cannot be successful if the community that they live and work in is not successful. So giving back to the community is incredibly important. So I gave you the example. In India, world-class commitment is 50 million women and girls. In the United States, we are focused on minority communities and getting them to college so that we can reduce the income gap through education. Here's the other thing, Udayan. My most valued asset is my 400,000 professionals. Getting them involved in their communities is an engagement strategy that is something that they value and that they covet. So we're not just collaborating with other NGOs, putting money in, we are involving our people in this world-class effort. And the progress has been remarkable. Okay. We've impacted nearly 40 million individuals so far. I'm confident that we will get to the 100 million number that we have committed to.
Well, it's good to hear you say, Puneet, that corporations are warming up to this idea as well, because there's a raging debate going on in something like, say, windfall taxes. On one hand, the governments are saying you need to be fair, you need to redistribute these taxes, and taxation needs to be progressive. If you make more money as a windfall, you need to give it back to the people who need it. But there's a lot of pushback from corporations on something like the windfall tax from energy companies, for example. How do you assimilate these two?
When we talk about windfall taxes, you've got to take the larger perspective. Businesses make investments so that they have a certain return. They take a risk. They need certain certainty. And if you change the rules of the game midstream, that is not conducive to an investment thesis. So I will basically respond to your question with, increasingly, it is in businesses' interests to look at all stakeholders and to take a longer-term perspective. It, I would argue, is maybe easier for a private enterprise in some respects, like Deloitte, than it is for a public enterprise that has to report every quarter. But taking a broader view, and it is around all kinds of issues. You mentioned income inequality. Climate is another area. We must. Climate and addressing climate change is the big issue of our generation. And businesses need to take a longer-term view and make sure that they're doing the right things in their business and in the ecosystem that they operate in, right, to address issues like climate change.
I was going to come to climate change, Puneet, actually, because ESG is in focus this week as well, with the COP27 summit going on. And there seems to be a lot of anger among people who are attending, saying that these corporations and big countries are keep talking about it, but they're keep kicking the can down the road. They're not doing it. They're not implementing anything which is meaningful. Is that your sense? Because you deal with so many large corporations in the large countries. Are they cognizant
That
of
is,
the risks that climate change poses, or is it just lip service?
oh, I think absolutely businesses are cognizant of the risks to their business and to greater society that climate change poses. You don't need to look at what has happened in Pakistan with the monsoons this year. I would say a direct result of climate change. The big climate events that we've had all over the world, and it has a direct impact on business because it impacts our communities, it impacts business directly. And so I think there is a very clear understanding that action needs to be taken. And I believe, and I can give you my example at Deloitte, I believe that businesses are taking the right types of actions. Deloitte has committed that we will be net zero by 2030, 20 years ahead of the Paris commitments, that our commitments are going to be audited, confirmed by science-based targets to keep within the 1.5 degree regimen. And we've taken three steps. We've certainly altered the way that we operate, the way we travel, our buildings, but we've also trained or armed our 400,000 professionals with appropriate education so that they can change behavior and influence their communities. And the third thing that we're doing is working with clients to help them navigate this climate emergency and work with our ecosystem of suppliers. When you're a $60 billion organization like we are, we buy a lot of stuff, and we are working with our suppliers to make sure that they are consistent with the commitments that we have made. And I've seen this happen in all the forums that I participate in across the board with business. Increasingly, businesses not only recognize that there is a climate emergency, they're making the effort required to make the change. Now, I think, could it go faster? Absolutely. Does it require everybody, all hands on deck? Absolutely. This cannot be solved by government alone. It cannot be solved by NGOs. It has to be solved by government, NGOs, and the business community. We need to invest something like 3.5 trillion to 5 trillion over the next 20 to 25 years to move away from a carbon-based economy to a more sustainable economy. And there is a lot of bad news or negative news, but there's also some good news in terms of the progress that is being made. But more needs to be done, absolutely.
Let me ask you a few questions on India, Punit, as well, because you hail from there, you spend a lot of time in India talking to Indian companies as well. Is all this talk or excitement around the China plus one opportunity for India real? I mean, when you talk to large clients globally, do they look at India as a potential manufacturing destination? Because, hitherto our prowess has all been in services. We are looked on as a services economy. But can we make the transition to a manufacturing powerhouse in reality?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I sit on the US India CEO Forum, and this is a key aspect of one of the key aspects that Minister Goel and Secretary Raimondo are leading. And I'm very confident, very bullish. Congratulations, by the way, to India becoming the fifth largest economy, soon to be the third largest in the next 5 or 6 years. And I think it is going to be a multifaceted growth story. Services about 250 billion to 300 billion. I don't see why it can't be $1 trillion part of the mix. Supply chains and the realignment of supply chains, where India, with its large base of capability, large domestic market, can be and should be a destination for resilient supply chains. Apple setting up a facility in Tamil Nadu and expanding that facility is a good example of that. So I see no reason why India cannot take advantage of this realignment of supply chains that came to the fore through the pandemic. I'm actually very bullish on that. By the way, I think India can and should take
What?
a
Yeah.
lead in some of the climate-based transition as well, whether it is in renewables or green hydrogen. But there is a piece that is often ignored, and that is nature-based solutions. To get us from where we are today to where we need to go, we certainly need to rely on technology that is in place now, but will come on in place in the next number of years. But we also need to focus on nature-based community answers to this climate emergency that we are facing. Or then, if you've been to Delhi or northern India or to Rohtak, this time of the year, because of stubble burning, air quality is horrendous. And the answer there is a nature-based, community-oriented solution that we, Deloitte, are piloting with the state of Haryana, as a for instance. And so that is another great area that India can and should take the lead.
You speak of Rohtak very fondly, Puneet. Let me ask you what you remember of that time, because I read that it was really a quirk or a twist of fate, you getting that Rotary Foundation scholarship, which started you on your global journey. Else you may well have worked your way from Rohtak to Delhi, but not quite achieved what you've gone on to achieve.
Isn't it interesting? You can look back in retrospect. You're absolutely right that Rotary Foundation scholarship was a stroke of luck and certainly changed the trajectory of my life. But it is really important to never forget where you're from. And I'm from Rohtak. And Rohtak of my youth was very different from the Rohtak of today. I remember there were a handful of cars. The Maruti car had just come. I left Rohtak in 1984. So India in 1984, Rohtak in 1984 was a very different place than it is today. And India, of course, in the last decade has changed even more. And so it's wonderful to be from Rohtak. My mother, still 82 years old, still lives in Rohtak in the same house that I grew up in. And I take my family back. We've been 30, 35 times. And it's wonderful to be from that town. But I can tell you, as you suggested, when you look back on your life, there are certain inflection points, if I may use that term, and the Rotary Foundation scholarship was certainly an inflection point. Sight unseen, never been on an airplane, never been outside the country.
Yeah.
I got a chance to leave, and it certainly changed my life.
Yes, it did. I want to ask you about another issue which is slowly coming to the fore post-COVID, Puneet, because it's happening everywhere in the field of sports to management. There's a lot more talk about and awareness also about mental health and the problems that people are facing. I think you yourself face something like that in your career, and who better to talk through it from the field of a very high stress kind of a job about this issue.
Well, Dan, you've hit on another very important point, the pandemic, and what we as a global community went through over the last 2 years, are in fact still going through, has really contributed to mental stress and mental health. I went through it, and we didn't talk about it as openly as we do now. Back in the 90s, I had been at Deloitte about 7 or 8 years, and I was being put up for partner, and I decided to step away and take a sabbatical. We call it a sabbatical now, but really a leave of absence, if you will, back in 1994. And I spent 6 months reassessing what I was going to do with my life, I went back to Deloitte and got back on the partner track and became a partner 2 years later in 1996. But again, looking back at my life, that break was central to my mental health and my ability to recharge and go back and contribute back. I would not have been a partner, certainly would not have reached global CEO level at Deloitte if I hadn't taken that break. I would not have met my future wife. I met her during that break, and I believe I certainly would not have met her, and that she's had a profound impact on my life. So that is a tangible example of me taking a break. The last 2 years has impacted all of us, including me. Working through Zoom certainly has its benefits, but not having the ability to interact, to go meet people, has had, and the stress of waking up. I woke up at 4 a.m. to do this interview, waking up at ungodly hours and working late into the night has certainly had an impact. And the first thing that we need to do, that we recognize, is we need to talk about it. We need to acknowledge that mental health is like any other aspect of health, and it needs to be talked about openly. Second, we need to put programs and efforts in place to address, to enable our people to address some of the issues that come with mental stress, whether it is external, pandemic related, or internal, the sabbatical example that I gave you that a particular individual might be facing. And then design programs so that we can, like we do with physical health, somebody has an ailment and we design programs to assist them to still contribute in their professional life. We need to design programs so that we can go ahead and address mental health. But this will take ongoing effort. One of the silver linings, the pandemic was very difficult and I think was a traumatic experience for all of us, but there were some silver linings that came out of the pandemic. One of the silver linings was the fact that we started acknowledging and talking about mental health and putting it at the right level within a corporation. If you don't have mentally healthy, just healthy individuals working for your business, you're not going to get their best. And for us to be able to compete, you started this interview talking about how competitive the Big Four is, and you're absolutely right. It is highly competitive. And my response was that one individual doesn't lead to the outcomes that we have experienced. It takes all of us, the entire team. If my team is not physically and mentally healthy, they're not going to bring their best self to work. So it is, again, the right business strategy to focus on mental health.
Punit, we've run out of time. We could go on talking to you. My apologies for pulling you out of bed at 4 a.m. in the morning, and compliments to all that you've achieved through your career, and the best of luck for what lies ahead as CEO Emeritus. Thank you very much for taking time out for us today.
Well, thank you. It was great to speak with you, and no problem whatsoever waking up at 4 in the morning. Take care.
All the best. Thank you.